Emma Parker stood in her warm, softly lit kitchen, the smell of roasted chicken and cinnamon pie wrapping around her like a familiar hug. It had been a long day of cooking and cleaning, but she didn't mind. Tonight felt special. Her husband, Michael, had invited his old college friend, Daniel, over for dinner. It had been years since they'd last seen him, and though Emma was tired, she wanted everything to be perfect. When the doorbell rang just after 7, she wiped her hands on a towel and hurried to greet their guest. Daniel stood on the porch, smiling politely, his coat slightly dusted with snow from the early Chicago winter. His hair was streaked with gray, and his face carried the calm lines of a man who'd lived enough life to appreciate quiet moments. "Emma," he said warmly, "you look exactly the same." She laughed softly. "That's kind of you to say. Come in before you freeze." Michael came downstairs just in time to meet him with a bear hug. The two men began laughing immediately, reminiscing as they stepped inside. Emma watched them, a small smile tugging at her lips. There was something comforting about seeing Michael like this, animated, talkative, alive. It had been a while since she'd seen that side of him. Dinner was filled with laughter and easy conversation. The men told old stories about their college days' late-night study sessions, pranks, and how they used to argue about everything from music to philosophy. Emma listened, occasionally chiming in with questions. She'd always admired how effortlessly Daniel could tell a story. His voice was calm, his words thoughtful. When dessert came out, the air felt warm and cozy. The lights above the table cast a soft glow across everyone's faces, making the moment feel almost cinematic. Emma poured tea, and for a while, she forgot about the quiet distance that had built between her and Michael over the years. By 11, the night had mellowed. Michael yawned and leaned back in his chair. "I should call it a night," he said. "Early meeting tomorrow." Daniel nodded. "I'll get going too in a bit." Michael stood, kissed Emma's forehead lightly, and said, "Thanks for dinner, hun. Everything was great." Then he went upstairs, leaving the two of them alone in the softly lit room. Emma began clearing the dishes, the clinking of plates filling the silence that followed. Daniel rose from his seat. "You've done enough tonight." "Let me help," he offered, taking a plate from her hands. She smiled faintly. "You don't have to. Guests aren't supposed to do dishes." "Then let's pretend I'm not a guest," he said with a half smile. "It feels strange to sit while you're working." Something about his tone made her pause. He wasn't flirting. There was just kindness in his voice, a rare kind she hadn't felt in a long time. She tried to ignore the sudden warmth in her chest and turned back to the sink as they washed and dried. Their conversation softened. They talked about his work in Seattle, how his marriage had ended quietly years ago, and how he now lived mostly alone with his dog. Emma listened, her hands moving mechanically through the dishes. Then he said, Michael used to brag about how lucky he was. He'd say he married the most patient woman in the world." Emma gave a small, sad smile. "That was a long time ago." Daniel looked at her closely. "You don't sound convinced." She hesitated, unsure if she should say anything. "Marriage isn't always easy. You get comfortable, and then quiet." He nodded. "Silence can be heavier than words." The simplicity of that sentence hit her unexpectedly. She looked at him, and for a moment she felt like he understood something she hadn't even said aloud. They stood in silence, only the faint hum of the refrigerator filling the air. Daniel broke the moment with a small laugh. "You always had this calm energy. Even when everything around you is chaos, you make it feel peaceful." Emma felt a lump in her throat. Compliments were rare in her life these days. She said softly, "Maybe too calm sometimes." When they finished cleaning up, Daniel sat back on the couch, glancing at the framed pictures around the room, family vacations, birthdays, old smiles. "You've built a beautiful home," he said. "It's taken years," she replied, sitting across from him. "But sometimes I wonder if it still feels like home." He tilted his head, sensing the emotion beneath her words. "You miss how things used to be." Emma nodded. "Michael's a good man. But somewhere along the way, life got busy. We stopped talking like we used to. Now it feels like we just share a roof. not a life. Daniel leaned forward, his voice gentle. That happens to a lot of people, Emma. Sometimes it's not that the love disappears, it just forgets to speak. Her eyes filled with unexpected tears. That's exactly it, she whispered. He didn't try to comfort her with empty words or touch her hand. He simply let her speak, and that somehow felt even more intimate. It wasn't romantic, just deeply human. After a long pause, she smiled weakly. I'm sorry. You didn't come here to listen to my rambling. Emma, he said quietly, you don't have to apologize for being honest. Sometimes honesty is the only thing that keeps us from feeling invisible. His words lingered in the air, filling the quiet space between them. Emma looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the same kind of weariness in his eyes that she felt in her own heart. There were two people standing on different sides of the same kind of loneliness. Outside. The wind rustled the trees, and a light snow began to fall. Time seemed to slow. Daniel stood and reached for his jacket. I should probably head out before it gets too late, he said softly. Imo followed him to the door. It was nice seeing you again, Daniel, she said sincerely. He smiled, a warm, kind smile that reached his eyes. It was nice seeing you, Emma. For a moment, they stood there in silence. There was no tension, no inappropriate thought, just the quiet understanding between two souls who had remembered, if only for a moment, what it felt like to be truly seen. When he left, the house felt emptier than before. Emma closed the door, leaned against it, and exhaled slowly. Her heart felt heavier, yet somehow lighter too, as if someone had opened a window she hadn't realized was closed. Upstairs, Michael was already asleep. His steady breathing filled the dark room. Emma slipped into bed beside him, staring at the ceiling. Daniel's words echoed in her mind. Silence can be heavier than words. For the first time in years, Emma realized how much silence she had been carrying. It wasn't about Michael not loving her. It was about how quietly love had faded into routine. Somewhere between laundry loads and grocery runs, between early meetings and late-night bills. They had stopped noticing each other. As she lay there, a strange resolve began to form inside her. She didn't know what it meant yet, but she knew one thing. She didn't want to keep living like this, unseen and unheard. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the world in soft white. Inside, Emma closed her eyes, whispering quietly to herself, maybe it's time to remember how to speak again. The following morning, the winter sun slipped weakly through the curtains, touching the edges of Emma's bed. She had barely slept. Thoughts of the previous night kept circling in her mind. Not the dinner, not even the conversation itself, but the way Daniel's words had echoed in her heart long after he left. Silence can be heavier than words. She turned her head to look at Michael, still asleep beside her. His breathing was steady, his face calm, untouched by the questions that had kept her awake. She didn't blame him. Life had simply become routine. But something inside her shifted last night, as if she had suddenly seen her own life from the outside and realized how quietly it had been passing by. She got out of bed, wrapped herself in a robe, and went downstairs. The house was still filled only with the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. She poured herself some coffee and stared out the window. The snowfall from last night had left everything blanketed in white. It was beautiful, peaceful, and somehow lonely. Just as she sat down, her phone buzzed on the counter. It was a message. From Daniel. Thank you for the dinner, Emma. It was really nice seeing you both again. I hope I didn't keep you up too late. She smiled at the screen before she could stop herself. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before she typed, You didn't. It was good catching up. Take care, driving home. She put the phone down quickly, almost guiltily, like she'd done something wrong. But there was nothing inappropriate in their exchange, just warmth, politeness, familiarity. Still, something about it stirred her. A quiet awareness she didn't want to name. Later that day, Michael left for work early, his briefcase in hand and his mind already elsewhere. Emma stood by the door, waved goodbye, and when the house went quiet again, she felt the silence press in on her like soft fog. She turned on some music, started cleaning. and tried to shake the strange mix of restlessness and clarity that had followed her since last night by mid-afternoon. She received another message, this time unexpected. I forgot to give Michael the file he asked for. Mind if I drop it by later? Emma hesitated for a moment. Michael wouldn't be home until late, but it wasn't unusual for Daniel to stop by. She typed back, "Sure, I'll be here." The rest of the day passed slowly. She cooked a simple meal, trying not to overthink things. When evening came, the sky outside turned a dusky purple, and the first snowflakes began to fall again. The doorbell rang just after 7. Daniel stood there, holding a small folder and smiling softly. "Sorry for bothering you again," he said. "It's no bother," Emma replied, stepping aside. "Come in before you freeze." He entered, brushing snow off his coat. The moment he stepped into the light, Emma noticed how tired he looked. Not just physically, but deeply. The kind of tired that comes from too many quiet nights alone. She gestured to the couch. "Would you like some coffee? It's fresh." He nodded with a grateful smile. "That sounds perfect." As she poured 2 cups, Daniel looked around the living room. "This house has so much warmth," he said. "You can tell it's lived in with care." Emma handed him the cup and sat across from him. "Thank you. I try to keep it that way, even if it gets quiet sometimes." They talked about small things at first, work, travel, old friends. But slowly the conversation drifted toward more personal ground. Daniel told her how hard it had been living alone after his divorce, how silence became both his comfort and his punishment. Emma listened, feeling a strange connection to his words. Then he said quietly, "Do you ever feel like you're standing in the same room with someone, but miles apart?" Emma froze for a moment, her eyes fixed on her cup. "Every day," she said finally. Their eyes met, and neither spoke for a long time. The air between them felt heavy with things unspoken, yet it wasn't uncomfortable. It was understanding, raw and real. Daniel sighed. "I didn't mean to make things heavy. Sometimes I forget what real conversation feels like. You're easy to talk to, Emma." She smiled faintly. "Maybe that's because we both forgot what it's like to be heard." He nodded slowly, as if her words struck something deep in him. Outside, the snow was falling harder now, brushing softly against the windows. After a moment, Daniel stood and walked to the bookshelf. He ran his fingers across the framed photos, family vacations, birthdays, old Christmas mornings. He paused at one photo, a younger Emma, laughing beside Michael. "You look happy here," he said. "That was years ago," she replied quietly. "Things change." He turned toward her. "Do you ever think about what makes people drift apart?" She nodded. "I think it happens slowly. You stop noticing the small things, the look in someone's eyes, the little gestures, the way they used to ask about your day. Then one day you realize you've both been living parallel lives." Daniel looked thoughtful. "And sometimes it takes someone outside to make you see it." Emma's breath caught slightly. The truth in his words felt too close. She quickly stood and moved toward the kitchen, pretending to refill her cup. "You should stay for dinner," she said, her tone softer. "It's too cold to drive back now." He hesitated. "Are you sure?" She nodded. "It's just stew. Nothing fancy." Dinner was quiet but comfortable, the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. When they finished, Daniel offered to help again with the dishes. Emma smiled. "You're making a habit of this." He grinned. "I guess I am." When they were done, they sat back down in the living room. The clock ticked softly. The only light came from the fireplace, flickering gold across the room. Daniel spoke first. "Emma, I hope I'm not overstepping, but you seem different. Not unhappy, exactly, but like you're carrying something you can't name." She looked at him, surprised by his honesty. "Maybe I am," she admitted. "I've spent so long taking care of everyone else that I forgot who I was when no one needed me." He nodded. "That's something I understand too well." The warmth of the fire and the sincerity in his voice made Emma's heart ache, not with desire, but with recognition. Here was someone who saw her, without judgment, without expectation. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed. A message from Michael, working late. "Don't wait up." She read it, then set the phone aside. The timing made her chest tighten. Daniel noticed the flicker in her expression, but said nothing. "Do you ever wish you could start over?" she asked quietly. He thought for a moment. "I think about it sometimes. But maybe starting over isn't about new places or new people. Maybe it's about finally being honest with ourselves." Emma stared into the fire, his words sinking deep. "Maybe you're right." The clock chimed softly. It was almost 10. Daniel stood reluctantly. "I should probably head home." She followed him to the door again. "Thank you for stopping by," she said. He smiled gently. "Thank you for listening." As he stepped outside, the cold air rushed in. He turned once more and added, "You have a kind heart, Emma. Don't let the quiet make you forget that." She closed the door slowly, standing in the stillness that followed. The warmth from the fire, the echo of his voice, the truth of their shared loneliness, it all lingered in the air. Upstairs, the house was as silent as ever. But this time, the silence didn't feel the same. It wasn't heavy. It was awakening. Something had shifted inside her, something she couldn't yet define. Emma sat by the window, watching the snow fall under the streetlights. The world outside looked calm and new, untouched. She pressed her hand against the cold glass and whispered to herself, "Maybe it's not too late to feel alive again." For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel invisible. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew this. She could no longer pretend that everything was fine. Something in her heart had opened. Quietly, but completely. And though she didn't know where it would lead, she felt a strange, steady peace, as if the world had started whispering again after years of silence. The following days passed quietly, yet Emma's thoughts were anything but calm. Every morning she found herself glancing at her phone, half expecting a message that never came. Daniel hadn't written since that snowy evening. She told herself it was for the best, that maybe what they both needed was distance, but silence sometimes spoke louder than words. Michael had become even busier at work. He left before sunrise, returned long after dark, and often disappeared into his office at home without a word. Emma tried to engage him, asking about his meetings or suggesting they take a weekend away. But his answers were short and distracted. Maybe next month, he'd say, or let's talk later, Em. But later never came. On one particularly cold Thursday, Emma found herself rearranging the bookshelf in the living room. Not because it needed tidying, but because she couldn't sit still. When she picked up an old framed photo, her, Michael, and their son on a beach, years ago, she felt a tug deep inside. She missed that version of herself, the woman who used to laugh easily and feel deeply. Just then, her phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was Daniel. "Hope you're doing all right. The snow's getting bad again. Stay warm." It was a simple message, but it filled the quiet room with warmth. She typed back before she could overthink it. "Thank you. I was just thinking about this weather. It feels endless." Moments later, his reply came. "Sometimes endless things have beauty too, like winter nights, or memories that don't fade." Emma read the words twice. There was nothing inappropriate in them, but the weight behind them was unmistakable, thoughtful, gentle, and real. That evening, while preparing dinner, she heard the wind howling outside. Michael called to say he'd be staying overnight at a conference hotel due to the storm. "Don't wait up," he said again. It was routine by now. She hung up and stared at her reflection in the kitchen window, the faint outline of a woman standing in a quiet house, surrounded by the hum of appliances and the whisper of falling snow. Something about it felt achingly familiar. Yet she couldn't shake the sense that her life had quietly slipped into pause mode years ago. An hour later, a knock at the door startled her. When she opened it, Daniel was there, bundled in a heavy coat, a snowflake-covered scarf around his neck. "Sorry to drop by like this," he said, his breath visible in the cold air. "My power went out. I remembered you said yours rarely does. I just needed a place to warm up for a bit." "Course," Emma said without hesitation. "Come in before you freeze." He stepped inside, shaking the snow off his coat. The warmth of the house wrapped around them, and for a moment, felt like a strange kind of peace had entered with him. "I was just making tea," she said. "Would you like some?" "That sounds perfect," he said with a tired smile, as she poured the tea. They spoke about the storm and the small frustrations of winter. But beneath the easy conversation, there was something else. A quiet awareness. The kind that lingers between two people who understand each other a little too well. After a while, Daniel looked around and said softly, "You have a beautiful home, Emma, but it feels lonely. Does that make sense?" She nodded slowly. "Yes, I suppose it does. Some homes hold too many quiet moments." He met her eyes. "You deserve more than quiet." His words hung in the air like the flicker of firelight. She didn't know what to say, so she simply looked away. Her hands wrapped around the warmth of her cup. They moved to the couch, talking about the past, not the heavy parts, but the nostalgic ones. Childhood memories, silly mistakes, old songs they both remembered. The conversation flowed effortlessly. Emma laughed more than she had in weeks. As the storm grew stronger outside, the wind rattled the windows. "You might not make it home tonight," she said. Daniel glanced toward the swirling snow outside. "You might be right. Stay here then," she said quickly. "It's safer." He hesitated. "I don't want to intrude." "You're not," she said softly. "The guest room's ready. It's fine." Kay smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Emma. You've always been kind." They spent the next hour by the fireplace, letting the conversation drift into comfortable silence. The crackle of wood filled the spaces between words. Daniel leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "Do you ever think," he began, "that we meet certain people to remind us of who we used to be?" Emma looked at him, surprised by the question. "Sometimes," she admitted. "Maybe we need those reminders." He nodded. "I think that's what you've been for me." Her chest tightened at his honesty. "And what about you?" she asked quietly. "What have you been for me?" He hesitated, then said softly, "Someone who sees you." For a long moment, they said nothing. The room felt heavy, yet not uncomfortable. It was the weight of understanding, the kind that doesn't need explanation. Emma looked into the fire, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's strange. I've lived in this house for 20 years, but tonight, it feels alive again." Daniel smiled gently. "Maybe it's not the house. Maybe it's you." She turned toward him, and for a brief second, their eyes held not in longing, but in truth. It was a moment of clarity, one that said more than words ever could. Then she stood, breaking the stillness. "I'll get you some blankets," she said when she returned. Daniel was staring at a photo on the mantel, a younger Emma and Michael on their wedding day. His eyes were thoughtful, not judgmental. "You were radiant," he said. Emma smiled faintly. "That was a lifetime ago." He turned toward her. "You still are?" Her heart skipped, and for a moment she didn't know how to respond. But she didn't need to. The moment passed, natural and unforced. She handed him the blanket. "Good night, Daniel." "Good night, Emma." She went upstairs, her heart unsteady but not heavy. For the first time in years she felt seen. Not as a wife, not as a hostess, but as a woman complex. Imperfect, alive. Lying in bed, she could hear the wind outside and faintly the creak of the floor downstairs. She thought about the evening, the laughter, the quiet, the words that would stay with her long after the snow melted. When morning came, the storm had passed. The world outside glistened in white silence. Daniel was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee. "Morning," she said, her voice gentle. He smiled. "You're up early. I couldn't sleep much." They talked quietly as sunlight filtered through the window. When he finally stood to leave, he paused by the door. "Thank you, Emma, for the tea, the warmth, and the company." She smiled softly. "You're always welcome, Daniel." He hesitated for a heartbeat, then said, "You know, sometimes life gives us second chances, not to change the past, but to feel something real again. Don't be afraid to take it." Then he was gone, his footsteps fading into the crisp morning air. Emma closed the door and stood there for a long moment, her heart full and still. She walked to the window, watching as he disappeared down the snowy path. For once, she didn't feel the usual emptiness that followed goodbyes. Instead, she felt something different, a quiet strength, a reminder that life still held moments worth feeling deeply. Later that evening, Michael called, "The roads are clear now. I'll be home soon." "That's good," she said. Her voice was calm, steady when she hung up. She looked around the house, the same furniture, the same walls, yet everything felt subtly changed. She realized it wasn't about Daniel or Michael. It was about her, about rediscovering the part of herself that had gone silent for too long. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Emma made tea for one and sat by the fire. She wasn't waiting for anyone, wasn't expecting a message. She simply sat in the quiet, content to be present. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone in the silence. She felt peace, because somewhere between the laughter, the storm, and the stillness, Emma had remembered what it meant to feel alive again.